When we think of war, we expect violence. But what happens when war pushes beyond every imaginable limit of human cruelty? Picture a battlefield. Now strip it of any sense of honor, any trace of strategy, any purpose beyond raw suffering. What I'm about to show you are the moments when war turned into senseless carnage, where pain was the objective and cultural destruction was seen as a trophy. Yes, we're talking about war crimes, but not the kind judged by modern international courts. No, we're going much further back. In this video, we're diving, in escalating order of brutality, into the most shocking war crimes of the ancient world. A time with no Geneva Conventions and no mercy. None of this is fiction. These are documented facts, preserved for centuries and still ignored by many. All of it backed by reliable historical sources, surviving chronicles and eyewitness accounts. And believe me, if you think modern history has seen atrocities, what comes next may leave you speechless. Are you ready to look at the past without filters? To face humanity's darkest side? Then stay with me, because the first chapter of this journey begins with the terror that came from the sea and shattered the faith of an entire continent. They emerged on the horizon like shadows cutting through the mist, silent at first, until the screaming started. By the time monks heard the drums, it was already too late. The skies over Northumbria's coast seemed to darken with the tide, and with it came the beginning of a new era of horror. The year was 793 AD, and a silent massacre marked what historians would later call the beginning of the Viking Age. It all started in an unlikely place, a peaceful monastery called Lindisfarne, isolated on the northeast coast of England, where monks lived in prayer, copying manuscripts and preserving the Christian faith. They were not prepared for the storm that was coming. The Vikings struck with unrelenting fury. Monks were slaughtered at the altar, churches were looted, holy relics burned, and most symbolically, the sacred words written on parchment were torn to ash. But what shocked the world wasn't just the violence, it was the utter contempt for the sacred. For the Christians of that time, this wasn't just an attack, it was a direct insult to God. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described the event as if hell itself had opened. Lightning tore through the sky, dragons were seen, evil omens overtook the island. But this was no myth, it was real. And it was just the beginning. From that moment on, the attacks multiplied like a recurring nightmare. The Vikings targeted the defenseless, coastal villages, unprotected farmlands, isolated monasteries. The strategy was simple: arrive without warning, destroy everything, take anything of value, and enslave the survivors. Women, children, the elderly, no one was safe. And for those who managed to survive, all that remained was the memory of their homes devoured by flames, and the sound of oars vanishing into the distance, carrying away their loved ones in chains. Can you imagine living in a time when the mere sound of the seas sparked terror in your heart? That maritime wave of terror swept across Europe for centuries. The word Viking became synonymous with fear, not for glory in battle, but for the brutality shown toward those who couldn't fight back. The image of the bloodthirsty raider became cemented in history, and unlike many other cultures, the Vikings didn't hide their crimes. They celebrated them. The voices of survivors, written down by chroniclers and clergy over the centuries, were the only form of resistance left. They turned suffering into testimony, and pain into memory. But the truth is, horror didn't always wear wolf pelts and carry wooden shields. Sometimes it wore polished armor, spoke elegant Greek, and marched under the name of Alexander the Great. The year was 332 BC. Along the Mediterranean coast, a city stood defiant. Its name, Tyre, a powerful Phoenician fortress built on an island, surrounded by walls that challenged both sea and army. To Alexander, this city was a direct obstacle to his conquest of the Persian Empire. To the people of Tyre, it would be the place of their final breath. Alexander wanted to send a message, and the way he did it would go down in history as one of the most brutal assaults of the ancient world. For months, the Macedonians tried and failed to reach the city by sea, but Tyre was famous for its navy. The ships blocked every approach. So Alexander did the unthinkable. He ordered the construction of a causeway, a kind of stone highway, that would connect the mainland to the island. A massive engineering feat, and when the walls finally gave way, there was no mercy. Over 6,000 people were massacred during the invasion. Not soldiers, civilians, residents who tried to resist, escape, or simply protect their families. But the worst was yet to come. 2,000 survivors were crucified on the beaches. Yes, crucified, raised on wooden crosses before the very sea that had once protected them, now displayed as a warning to the world. Their silhouettes stretched in a gruesome line, visible from miles away. It was terror turned into spectacle, a monument made of flesh and suffering. And the rest, enslaved, 30,000 men, women, and children, chained, sold like property, scattered across the empire. The Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus described the event in detail, not as an isolated tragedy, but as a calculated move from Alexander's cold and strategic mind. Tyre wasn't just a military conquest. It was a message, a clear demonstration that resistance meant extinction. And from that moment forward, Alexander ceased to be just a military genius. He became a symbol of domination, a name that would echo through history. And if crucifying thousands on a beach already sounds like the limit of brutality, imagine erasing an entire city. Not just its people, but its temples, its books, its language, its gods, its memory. That's what Rome did to Carthage. We're now in 146 BC, at the climax of the Third Punic War. For over a century, Rome and Carthage battled not only for territory, but for the soul of the Mediterranean. 3 bloody wars, betrayals, sieges, and epic battles, until Rome decided that victory wasn't enough. Carthage had to be destroyed, and the destruction wasn't just military. For 3 years, the Romans besieged the city with full force. The Carthaginians resisted fiercely. Men, women, and children fought in the streets, on rooftops, in the ruins. But when the walls finally fell, what followed was one of the greatest civilian massacres of the ancient world. Out of 700,000 inhabitants, only 50,000 survived. All of them were enslaved. Think about that. 650,000 people killed. Not in pitched battle, but slaughtered house by house, street by street. Roman General Scipio Aemilianus gave the final order: burn it all, and Carthage burned. Temples engulfed in flames, libraries reduced to ash, sacred statues smashed, ancestral buildings turned to rubble, an entire city erased from the face of the earth. Literally, Rome even salted the land so that nothing could ever grow there again, as if they wanted to kill even the idea of hope. Historians Polybius and Appian recorded the horror. Polybius, who witnessed the flames from afar, wrote that Scipio wept, not for the Carthaginians, but because he realized that one day Rome would suffer the same fate. But why such hatred? Carthage was a powerhouse, wealthy, sophisticated, culturally advanced. It was a mirror Rome didn't want to look into, so Rome chose to shatter the reflection. It wasn't enough to win. They had to rewrite Carthage's ending as an eternal warning. No enemy of Rome must survive. The destruction of Carthage wasn't just a war crime. It was a cultural genocide, a conscious effort to wipe out an entire civilization. Its people, its history, its voice. And for centuries, it worked. Carthage became dust, a whisper buried in the sands of North Africa. If you think wiping out a civilization was the peak of ancient horror, let me show you the empire that didn't just kill, it turned torture into an art form. And no one did that with more method, coldness, and brutality than the Assyrians. Still, if you believe the Romans went too far, know this: Genghis Khan went even further. We're at the dawn of the 13th century, and the world is witnessing the unstoppable rise of the greatest conqueror of his time, Genghis Khan. His empire expanded like a storm of dust and blood. Entire populations surrendered before the first arrow was loosed, because they knew what came next. But in Nishapur, in modern-day Iran, someone dared to resist, and the price was nothing short of apocalyptic. In 1221, the city rebelled. During the conflict, one of Genghis Khan's sons-in-law was killed. What followed wasn't just punishment. It was cold, calculated, and utterly annihilating. General Teguçer, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, was beloved and strategically vital. His death ignited a blind fury. The response came in the form of annihilation. Nishapur was besieged, and then erased. The number is almost unimaginable. 1.7 million people killed. Women, children, the elderly, all slaughtered without mercy. The entire city became a mountain of corpses. Persian historian Juvayni, one of the few who documented the horror, describes bodies heaped, blood flowing through the streets, and homes turned into mass graves. And the most disturbing part, Genghis's daughter decreed that no prisoner should be spared. She ordered every single person to be executed, one by one, to satisfy her grief. This massacre wasn't swift. It was systematic, organized. Every individual was identified, hunted down, and killed. Can you imagine an entire city disappearing in just days? Nothing was left standing. No structure survived. No culture endured. The land fell silent, except for the vultures and the scent of death. This was more than just an attack. It was a message. Those who spill the Khan's blood will be swallowed by the earth. Nishapur wasn't the only conquest, but it was the most symbolic. It showed the world that under the Mongol Empire, human life could be reduced to dust, demanded by nothing more than personal revenge. And if you think you've seen the pinnacle of brutality, what would you do if you realized that the next arrow carried something far deadlier than metal? Sieges have always been brutal, but in 1546, on the shores of the Black Sea, something horrifyingly new emerged. What happened at Kaffa, a Genoese city in Crimea, would change humanity's fate and might just ignite one of history's greatest catastrophes. The enemy was still the Mongols, but this time they used corpses, not swords. During the siege, the bubonic plague, a silent, deadly disease, struck the Mongol camp. Instead of retreating, their generals turned disaster into a weapon. They began catapulting plague-ridden corpses over the city walls. Yes, you heard that right. Decaying bodies, riddled with black sores and teeming with deadly bacteria, were launched like living missiles. A reign of plague, and it worked. Within days, chaos erupted inside the walls. Defenders fell sick. Panic spread, order collapsed. But what came next was even worse. A few Genoese escaped Kaffa by ship, unwitting carriers of the plague. They crossed the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and landed in Italian ports. From there, the disease spread like wildfire. The Black Death had begun. Between 25 and 50 million people died within a decade. Entire cities vanished. Families were buried in mass graves. Monks halted prayers. Doctors fled. Children were left in the streets. Fear was total. No one knew where it came from. But now you do. After witnessing centuries of brutality, blood, revenge, and silence, what does all this reveal about humanity? We realize that some leaders are hailed as heroes, yet their actions left trails of horror that today would be labeled crimes against humanity. Massacres, mass enslavement, torture as official policy, biowarfare. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these war crimes struck you as the most brutal? And why do you think many of these events remain little known today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you've stuck around this far, you know this channel delivers the stories many avoid telling. So if you're ready to continue exploring forgotten truths and the darkest chapters of history, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps keep these stories alive, even the ones the world tried to bury. To learn about the most brutal and violent punishments used in the Ottoman Empire, click the screen now.